settle down now. Oh, okay, we are live. Apologies, my fault that we've come on a couple of minutes late because I've got a cat messing about on my lap and I don't know if he's going to behave himself. Welcome to Simply Natal's Healing Within and Without live series, guest live series. Today we are very honoured with the presence of Lucy Ruddle, IBCLC. It just rolls off the tongue, Lucy, doesn't it?
It's so
easy. And I'm really excited to speak to you. So if you're not familiar with the layout, we've got a few questions about healing and we're going to go through those, and of course we'll just go wherever the conversation takes us, so we'll let it take us in whatever direction. There'll probably be some talk about birth at some point, just so you know. And of course, if we have anyone watching live who's got any questions or would like to comment, they can do that too. Because we're live on StreamYard though, you'll just need to accept the permissions from StreamYard on Facebook so that we can see your name when you comment, otherwise you'll be anonymous. Okay, Lucy, so first of all, would you like to tell us a little bit about you and what you do?
Sure thing. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm equally as excited to be here because I think you're amazing. So when you asked me, I was like, yeah, I'll do it. So my name is Lucy, as you said, and I'm a lactation consultant, IBCLC, which, you know, is not, as you kind of alluded to just now, the easiest title. So people tend to call people like me, I don't know, the breastfeeding lady or the boob guru or the boob wizard. And essentially that's because our role as IBCLCs is to protect and support breastfeeding. It's the highest qualification you can gain in lactation support around the world. And globally, we're considered to be something of experts when it comes to lactation care. I'm a mum to two boys. They are 5 and 7. And as of today, I'm also a dog owner, which is still sinking in just a little bit. We picked up our greyhound this afternoon.
Oh, amazing. Okay, so of course, yeah, I mean, you're well practiced clearly because you just said lots of things all like very succinctly there. And you know, of course, your job itself actually entails lots of things included within that kind of title, and I'm sure we'll go into some of those things as we're talking as well, especially when it comes to thinking about healing journeys and that sort of thing. So the series itself is called Healing Within and Without. So we're going to start with a general question about, well, what does that mean? What does that mean to you when you hear that phrase? And there's no right or wrong answer, so I'm not trying to catch you out.
You got a score chart there somewhere that you're comparing everybody.
Yeah, I am really. Yeah.
Is there a prize if we win?
Maybe, who knows?
Could be, maybe a knitted boob or something. So healing within and without, I mean, certainly in the context of what I do for a job, a big part of my work is supporting families to heal from the trauma that breastfeeding can cause in the early days. And that often follows on from the trauma of birth. You know, we have typically a situation where somebody's had a very difficult birth experience. Perhaps they've ended up having a C-section. They're healing from that physically. And it becomes more important to people often in those cases that breastfeeding works. And if it doesn't, they then have to heal from this sense of failure around their birth experience and a sense of failure around their breastfeeding experience. So what I'm doing, yes, I'm supporting women to heal their nipples and heal their mastitis, but also I'm supporting them to heal this sense of grief and guilt and shame and failure that many of them carry with them as they come into motherhood.
Oh, that's given me goosebumps. Just because it's so important for us to hear the truth, and that's what you've just said. That everything to do with this whole journey, isn't it? Pregnancy, birth, postnatal period, breastfeeding, parenting. There's two parts of it. There's what we see on the outside and there's what is happening on the inside. And I suppose that's what we're saying, you know, there's the things that we can help practically and on the outside, but often there's a lot going on the inside that we're working on too. So leading on from that then, I'm going to check my questions just to make sure, but I'm thinking I'm going to take you to oh no, I've missed a question. I'm going to go to, why is healing more important in a wider context? And then I'm going to come to what healing means to you and why Oh no, sorry, I'm reading my questions in the wrong order because I'm just nervous. So,
It's a
so
Thursday night. We're allowed to be nervous, right? I feel like you need to have a glass of wine with you, and then all will be right with the world.
I've got a glass of water. Let's do that.
Yeah, water's good too.
Okay, so I'm reading my questions in the wrong order. So
It's
next one
fine.
is, so then, and this makes more sense after describing that. So what does healing mean to you personally? Do you have a healing journey of your own that you would like to share? And it might be the reason why you've ended up doing what you're doing, as I've found with a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, just that question takes me right back to pre-pregnancy me. I just recovered from bulimia. I was actually still not particularly well mentally. I fell pregnant with my eldest son, and it wasn't the healing experience I thought it might be. I thought that I might have this new freedom around food, and actually I didn't. But when he was born, so initially when he was born, I had this such difficulty with breastfeeding, and it wasn't. I mean, it did hurt, but actually, what I struggled with more than anything as an early years worker was the fact that this baby just didn't seem to follow a schedule. And of course, I can laugh about it now, right? And as I'm sure this is the work you do too, right? Is the babies don't follow schedules.
Oh yeah.
But at the time, as a new mum, I was like, well, he's supposed to feed every 2 hours, and then he's supposed to go to sleep, and I'm supposed to get some rest. And this wasn't happening, right? Because babies hate Moses baskets and they hate sleep. So I stopped breastfeeding, and then just had this awful regret around doing that, and really struggled emotionally, fell into quite a pit of postnatal depression, I suspect, looking back. Lots of tears, lots of guilt, lots of shame. And so I decided after a few weeks of this to start again, to relactate. And for me, the relactation process was the healing bit I didn't get in pregnancy and birth. And my birth was traumatic, pregnancy was difficult, but relactation was the very first time I had this idea that my body could actually do something quite incredible. It could produce milk after I told it to stop making milk, and my baby could get nourishment from my breast after he hadn't had nourishment from my breast. And that really was the start of this whole thing for me.
Oh, amazing. And even more of a healing journey because of your history with eating disorders as well. To have that realization that your body can do something that perhaps you'd never believed your body was able to do anything useful. Sorry, I'm putting words in your mouth. That's my understanding of eating disorders in general. And I think a lot of us, a lot of women, a lot of people in female bodies, we have that pressure from the media about what our body is supposed to be for, what's it supposed to do, who's it supposed to serve, and it's certainly not us. So when it comes to birth and breastfeeding, what we're actually finding is that part of our healing journey is rediscovering that our body belongs to us, and it's pretty awesome.
And often it's the first time that we've had this understanding that our body belongs to us. We go through our whole lives being told what to do with it by our parents, by doctors, by society, by fashion. And then when it comes to breastfeeding and birthing, when it comes down to it, only we can do it. And people can tell us the ways that they want us to do it, but ultimately you will, generally speaking, do things the way that work for you. And that's so empowering to, for Western women in general, I think, just to suddenly go, oh, I don't have to follow the rules here. I don't have to do what the doctor said or what the book said. My body's doing this. I just think that's amazing.
Yeah, so clever. And the more you find out about breastfeeding in particular, I mean, all of it is pretty magical, but when you find out the things that the breast can do, I mean, it blows the mind. I remember when I first read, and it was in the hazy newborn days after birth trauma and all of that going on, that I read about how my baby communicated through my breast and told my body what it needed to make, and then my body responded, and I was just like, whoa, this is mind blowing. I think especially when you're very vulnerable as well, it's so overwhelming, but both in a positive and a negative way, because it's like, how can you stop breastfeeding when you find that sort of thing out? How can you make that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, the mind-blowing fact was that my breasts would change temperature to accommodate my baby's needs for warmth or cooling. I just thought that was amazing, that I could monitor, maintain his own temperature with my boobs. I mean, that's so cool. But yeah, you're right. Once we have this information in our hands, and if breastfeeding is difficult, that often seems to be where this feeling of failure comes from if women do end up stopping breastfeeding, because they'll say to me, you know, I feel so guilty about stopping because it's the best thing for my baby for me to breastfeed, or, you know, my body has failed me again because I'm supposed to provide this magical stuff to my baby and I haven't been able to. And it can take on a really difficult space in our heads, you know.
It's really sad, isn't it? And requires a lot of reframing, and I think that's probably part of what you do in your job as well. And I've seen some of your memes do a really good job of it, and other lactation consultants as well are doing the same work, and peer supporters and doulas and lots of people who support breastfeeding, saying instead of saying I wanted to breastfeed but I stopped after 2 weeks, I wanted to breastfeed and I did it for 2 weeks, you know, reframing that into something positive, something that we actually did with our body instead of something that we failed at. And of course, you know, I teach hypnobirth, and so a lot of what I do is about reframing thoughts and about changing the way we think and the things that we believe about ourselves as well. I think you'd probably do a lot of that too.
Definitely, and I think there's a real kind of almost a new wave of lactation consultants in the last 5 or 10 years, where we are shifting that focus away from, you know, you couldn't, you didn't, you should and you shouldn't, to amazing, you gave one feed via a syringe that was colostrum, fantastic, that's your baby's first immunization, almost good for you, you know, or you gave a little bit of breast milk for so much time. I mean, that the advantages to your baby that you've given, and that just that reframing, you know, which we know is so useful in labour and preparing for birth, really comes into its own in lactation. I spend a lot of my time helping parents to reframe their thoughts around their breastfeeding journeys. There's a lot of talk about failure until we come in and do that reframing work.
Absolutely. So that takes us really nicely onto the next question, because the next question is about healing in a wider context. Why is that important? We can talk about our own experiences and those of the people that we meet and we help and we support. But why is that work important? Why do we need healing as a society?
Such a big topic, and I get really like passionate. I
Yeah.
think it comes down to the way we treat women in our society and the patriarchy, and there's so much to consider. You know, when someone has gone through a healing process, they tend to be more at peace with what they've experienced, which can help a lot of the anger and defensiveness just fade away. And then that means that the anger and defensiveness is no longer there and being aimed at perhaps other women in their community, you know, oh, I never breastfed, so don't worry about it, you know, just stop. That goes, and it just, I don't know how much sense I'm making, but it just feels like when someone heals, we stop that spiral of negativity that just flows through generations of women.
Absolutely. No, I know what you mean. It's like every time one person heals, we all benefit. We all benefit from that, even if we don't see the benefit straight away. And very often we're torn apart, aren't we, in social media and forums and whatever. There's always this group of people versus this group of people, and that happens a lot in mum stuff. It's like the breastfeeders and the bottle feeders and the this and the that and the cesarean births and the natural births, and it's like we're all just the same. Actually, when we do that healing work, we realize that we're all just the same, and whatever's happened in our lives have taken us to a different place. But you're right, because we have leftover residual anger and frustration and trauma as a result of those experiences and how we were treated, we then approach it differently. So then it seems like we're at loggerheads with each other when really we're not. We all just want to be good and heal and enjoy our lives. Surely, is that not the whole point?
That we all just want to feel part of a community and supported and loved and heard. And you know, I'm thinking of one of the people who supported me in the beginning, and learning through her that anger is often a mask for grief or sadness or fear, typically.
Yeah.
And that was a real moment for me, because I was so angry about my breastfeeding journey and so angry at people who could breastfeed. And when she just said, oh, it's really interesting because often, not always, but often, anger is a mask for fear. And I'm just wondering if there's any fear there for you. And there was so much fear. You know, I was afraid that I'd fail, that I'd let my son down, that he was going to suffer because I wasn't breastfeeding him. And as soon as that mask was kind of taken away, you know, that opens up that space to begin to explore why you're feeling the way you're feeling, and to pick it apart and to make peace with it. And the more we can do that, the happier and healthier everybody is in our society.
Absolutely. And it's something that comes up quite a lot with when I'm supporting people to go on and have a better birth experience this time. Often they're carrying with them that anger from the injustice of it all, of how it happened in the first place. And I see that, and obviously call it when I see it, because I know what it is. I've been there too. That we have to be able to let go of that to some degree, to be able to see what's underneath it and work through it. And that job is ours. Like, we can't expect, we put a lot of the blame on outside of us when that work needs to happen within us. And yes, work needs to happen in society and in education and all of that stuff, but we can't do that effectively if we're living underneath the mask of our own anger and frustration and trauma as well. It is big stuff. I love it.
Me too.
Okay, so you alluded before to your birth being traumatic. Now we know that doesn't tell us anything about birth, because we know that a traumatic birth for one person is very different to how someone else might experience it. I suppose I'd like to ask you, what does healing birth mean to you? Healing birth. So of course we've talked about how breastfeeding, the journey itself, can be a healing one or not. What would healing birth be to you, having experienced a difficult birth? And tell us a bit about your difficult birth if you would like to. You don't have to.
Yeah, sure. So I actually had 2 difficult births. So both my births were fun, shall we say. But the difference was with Oliver, my youngest. So with Alfie, my eldest, he was my first. I didn't know what to expect, and I had an induction for post dates, which I now know is questionable. And the labour started hard and fast as a result, most likely, and it was back-to-back labour, which I just wasn't prepared for. Ended up having an epidural, which only partially worked, and then it was too late for another one, and baby was coming, and then I hemorrhaged. So it was pretty difficult. But many people, when I spoke to them kind of afterwards, would say things, the typical response that we know people give, at least you're healthy, at least baby's here, it could have been worse. And I had a friend who'd had had such a significant hemorrhage at about the same time as me that she'd ended up in ICU, and I hadn't. I just needed 1 unit of blood, and so I kind of had that comparison thing going on. But that traumatized me far more than my second birth, even though my second birth ended up in a crash section with me under GA, because I had a doula with me second time round. Right. And because I think after he was born, and I woke up, he was placed skin to skin with me, and I had that rush of love that I didn't get with my first, because everything was so like, you're bleeding, dad needs to hold baby, this is all a bit much. And I never got to have that uninterrupted moment just to connect with my baby. But with Oliver, even though I was groggy and desperate for a drink of water because my throat was dry, I got to have that moment, right? And having that support of the doula as well. So it's interesting how the event itself could be seen very understandably as traumatic, but the people I had around me and the situations that I could control around that event made it less traumatic than the one that people would assume was less traumatic, if that kind of makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah. And I have the same assumptions made about mine, because my healing birth, my second birth, was a cesarean, an elective one. So a lot of people would make the assumption that was, oh, that's a shame. A best day of my life, same as you. I got my baby and I felt that rush of love, and that's all I wanted. That's all I wanted, because I didn't get it the first time. And
Absolutely.
My first birth was a vaginal water birth in a birth centre. On paper looked perfect, and is in fact the sort of birth that I help people to plan for, because that's what they want as their dream birth. But of course, it's not the circumstances; it's how we feel that matters. And the second time, you were helped to feel supported and safe, and like you could control certain things, and that's the thing that mattered, and that's the thing that matters to us.
Definitely. And I remember very clearly, the only thing I wanted really was to labour. successfully, without screaming for an epidural and being scared the whole way through. And I had a wonderful labour. You know, the doula made sure that the lights were low. We had little electric candles. There was music. There were essential oils. I was absolutely rocking it. And I got to a certain point and they couldn't find the baby's heartbeat at all, or they could, but it was incredibly slow. And I wasn't quite dilated enough for forceps. So off we went to theatre. But all I remember is I laboured really well. I didn't,
Yeah.
you know, when you say I enjoy labour, but I guess you know what I mean by that. I felt powerful in labour and in control in labour, and I was on top of it. And that in itself was so healing as well, just knowing that I could labour.
Absolutely. But it's funny, isn't it, how we then compare it to the first time when we've had one experience. That's 100% of our experience, and I'm sure you find this in breastfeeding too. 100% of our experience, when that was negative, every time, for every moment that we have that's different to that in a positive experience, it cancels out that time. It makes it unhappen, which just seems ridiculous, but that's kind of how healing works, because trauma changes the brain, so it kind of puts it back together where it was supposed to go in the first place. And I remember postnatally with Milo, after my healing birth, every single day I remembered the same day after Riley. I remembered it vividly, because that's what happens with trauma. So I every day replaced that day, and I'd be like, oh, I remember day 3, it was like this, it was horrible. This day isn't. There we go. I can get rid of that one now. It's
Yeah.
funny, isn't it? And do you find that happens a lot with people when they're coming to you for a second or third breastfeeding journey?
I do. There's often a bit of how would I describe it? Often they'll come to me and they will be holding on to fear from the last time. So they'll say, my last baby had a tongue tie, my last baby had slow weight gain. And often what I'm seeing are parents who have clinically well babies who are doing very normal things, but they're going back and they're thinking, well, with my first baby, they did a bit of this, but things weren't okay. It was a warning sign that things weren't okay. And then they panic and they almost need to be reassured that actually, in this case, look at your baby's weight gain, look at the fact that you're breastfeeding comfortably, and this is probably cluster feeding, and this isn't a crisis. And once you can help them kind of normalize what they're experiencing, you do see the shoulders drop and, you know, the light bulbs go on, and it's like, oh, I'm doing it, this is working this time. And then the healing comes in, and I'll often come back several months down the line and describe it as a healing journey, following on from their first. But when they're in the thick of it, quite often they just need a bit of a nudge, you know, just a bit of support to get there.
Yeah. And a lot of the work that I think both of us are doing is about normalizing what is normal, like normalizing normal newborn behavior, normalizing what birth is supposed to be like, normalizing what breastfeeding is supposed to be like, because our perceptions about it are so skewed by what we've picked up in the media and what we've not learned. What we've not learned is potentially even more damaging than what we have learned, or I don't know what I'm saying. It could be the other way around. Who knows? But we learn damaging things, and then we don't learn things, and that's damaging too. And yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that. What do you think?
I think you're making a really good point, and I'm as you were talking, I was reminded of in other countries where breastfeeding is just very normal, and perhaps there isn't the influence of bottle feeding and television. You'll often see mothers feeding their baby in quite an upright position, with the baby coming up the body. In the West, where we are so used to bottles and formula, we'll often see mothers using the cross cradle position, which mimics the bottle being given. And it can be quite alien to these women to say, you know, if you lean back a little bit and scoot baby's hips down towards your hip, you might find that things go better. And, you know, they're so used to seeing babies in this kind of, you can't see what I'm doing very well, but babies up here being fed with a bottle. And the other thing that I see a lot of is women chasing babies with their breast, because they think with the bottle, you put the bottle in the baby's mouth, so they think the breastfeeding is the same. They're kind of going around, yeah, come on, go on, latch on, and it doesn't work. It doesn't go very well. So not being exposed to the normal infant behavior, or the biological norm, I should say, means that when it comes to us having our own babies, we can only go on what we've grown up with and what we see in our society. And in the West, that's bottle feeding and very medicalized births in soap operas, right? You know, and
Oh yeah.
One Born Every Minute is a classic example, I think, of very medicalized birth.
And I mean, every representation of birth, and I'm sure you notice this more with breastfeeding, and I notice it more with birth, but every single movie, you're like, it's the same. Like, we know birth is not the same every time, and you know, a breastfeeding relationship is not going to be the same every time, but we just see the same thing over and over again. Birth looks exactly the same, whether it's in this film from the 1980s or this film from 2011. You know, just looks like the same thing happening. I've been watching something. What have I been watching? Once Upon a Time. Like, don't judge me because it's just a bit trashy, but it's just fun because it's like fairy tales and everything. And there's a couple of times during that where people are having babies, and I'm like, yeah, this is set in like an enchanted forest, like in fairy tale land, and yet they're there on the back with the knees up in the air going, ah! Like, I'm pretty sure birth wouldn't look like that if you were giving birth in a forest. Like, that's not what it would look like. But it's so strange, isn't it, how we take this idea and we think it's normal, and then we put it into this other context and accept it as okay. Yeah, really weird. And you notice the same with breastfeeding as well. Like, you see babies being held like this. Like, no, that's not how you would. And when you see them walking around, like they're like, it's like a medieval time, and they're carrying the baby. Like, no, you would have it in a sling. You wouldn't be carrying your baby around in a shawl. You'd have it wrapped to your body, because that would just be dangerous. Like, you're in a busy marketplace carrying this baby around. Right. Like, crazy, isn't it? But
I remember getting really cross with The Walking Dead when they introduced the baby.
Over. He's going a bit mental. He's trying to knock everything over.
Does he want to join in?
Yeah, probably. I probably haven't fed him.
In The Walking Dead, when they bring in the baby, Judith, and her mother dies, and it's like, let's just carry this baby around. You're like, there are zombies. Where are the slings? And the formula comes in, and it's like, I'm sure someone could have lactated to support this baby rather than trying to make up formula with dirty cold water that could be contaminated with zombie brains. But okay, we'll go with it. But yeah, the sling in particular just had me like, where's the sling? This isn't safe.
It just makes sense, doesn't it? You know, you've got to run away quickly. Attach the baby to your body. Don't like try carrying it around precariously while you're balancing over a bridge or whatever. Yeah, it's mental. And when you really look at it like that, you realise like what the media is just so full of rubbish, and that's what we're being fed all the time. There's nowhere else we can get that information from. And a lot of breastfeeding problems that people have are related to position and attachment, of course, because we're not taught what is normal for how to feed a baby when it's at the breast. And so your initial thought is, well, I just hold the baby like this and it does it. And so when I was, practicing as a peer supporter, the first thing I'd be doing is like, let's get that baby's arm out the way, because it's right there, like in the way of the breast, and face the baby towards you, and like give them access to the nipple. Like, probably a good place to start. Yeah. And it makes so much sense when you know, but that's the problem. We just mostly don't know.
That's a really interesting thing, because that's what I'm doing all day, every day, right? I'm looking at babies going to the breast, and I'm going, just move baby in so their tummy is touching you, and just move that arm out of the way, and just line them up this way, and just try this, and just try that. And it rolls off my tongue because I've been doing it for so many years now. I forget that this stuff that feels very basic to me is new information to parents, and I have to really remind myself every time I go into a session that this parent doesn't understand that we have to have baby facing the boob to feed. That doesn't make sense to them because they've not grown up with it. And it's amazing how I guess it shows that we can learn these things if we're exposed to them often enough. I wouldn't be needed, because we would all know how to feed our babies. It would just be like, you would just turn them in and you would feed them. But because we don't see it, I have a job, which is nice, but also a shame,
Yeah, I feel similar about the stuff that I do with birth, really. Like, if we had the education in place, a lot of the stuff that I'm teaching would be irrelevant, because we'd already know it. We'd already understand physiological birth from when we're at school, and we wouldn't need to be asking the questions about it when we're like actually pregnant for the first or second or third time, and then we're finding out how physiological birth works. Yeah. So my question was actually, what do you wish you'd known about yourself, about birth, about babies before you had your own? We've kind of been talking around that already. Is there anything else that you'd like to offer that you wish you'd known?
Goodness. I mean, the biggest thing for me was that I didn't need that first induction. I wish I'd someone had said to me, the midwife had said to me, "Oh, you're, I don't know, 8 or 9 days overdue." But we don't have any spaces for induction on when you would be 14 days overdue. So we need to induce you tomorrow. And I didn't question that. Now I'm like, what the what? But then I was like, oh, well, okay, I'll have the induction then, I guess, because I don't want to put my baby at risk. If I had just had the information that that was utter nonsense at that point, I suspect I wouldn't have had an induction with my first, and I suspect the birth experience would probably have been very different as a result. So that is the one thing, is I wish I had really known of what induction was, what when it was indicated, when it wasn't indicated, and the true risks behind turning that induction down, which actually in my case were probably very, very low.
And the thing is, that's the kind of thing that I have conversations about probably daily.
I bet you do, yeah.
I wish I'd known I could say no. And of course that applies to everything, completely everything in our whole lives, but especially in maternity, because for some reason we've got this understanding that when it comes to maternity, we somehow don't own our bodies anymore. And so we have to ask permission and be allowed. But it's always our choice, and that includes induction, and it includes whether we decide to accept a stretch and sweep, which, you know, in the birth world we might also call an induction. So, you know, to think very carefully about that. It's not about saying that it's always rubbish or that it's never medically indicated, but that we're allowed to make our own decisions either way. Even if it is medically indicated, we're allowed to say, no thanks, don't fancy it.
Totally.
And
with
if
my
anything
second,
changes, I'll change my mind, but at the moment, not right now, thanks.
that's it. Okay, sorry, I've got a 6-year-old, 7-year-old asking for snacks. The joys of working from home. And with my second, actually, his induction was indicated. He wasn't moving. But I'd had the fear of God put into me with my first induction experience that I turned down his induction, and actually probably should, with hindsight, have accepted it. But I went back 2 days later and said, I want my induction now, please, actually, and they gave it to me. And that's kind of the thing, isn't it? It's being able to say, do you know what? I made the wrong decision here. I've changed my mind. And often it feels like that choice isn't really given. It's implied that you must do this thing now because it's convenient. We've got space on the ward and the anaesthetist is in. Whereas if you decide in 3 days' time that you want to do it, then that's potentially really annoying for us. But they put it to you as your fault, you know.
Yeah, and absolutely. And it's not even always that we might say it was the wrong decision, just that it was a different decision then, like based on everything that was happening then. And I was terrified. It wasn't a good idea to choose that route, because you would have ended up with a terrifying induction, because how can you get out of that mindset? So you needed that couple of days to settle into the idea, to then make the decision to do it. So the process was important, like that made it the way that it was.
That's such a good point. And again, with Alfie, it was like, we were inducing you, this was like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we're inducing you at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, go home, pack a bag, come back. You know, it was like that. But because with Oliver, I said, no, I want to go and talk to my dealer about it. I want to see how the next couple of days go. We'd put together, like, you know, those adult colouring books and some lavender oil and the electric candles that I spoke about and some affirmation cards. And you know, I'd spoken to people about it and I got my head around it. And then, of course, apart from how it ended, the labour and induction experience itself was far more positive, probably, as you've said, because I was going into it with a bit of headspace.
Because it was your decision and you owned it. And that makes a huge difference to how then it unfolds. And like you say, even though it ended up with a cesarean, it didn't matter, because you'd gone into that with your eyes wide open, knowing exactly what was happening, knowing it was your choice all along. And that matters. And I often have similar conversations postnatally about breastfeeding too, that, you know, well, I stopped breastfeeding at day 3, so, you know, now I'm formula feeding. And it's like, but baby's a week old. It's okay for you to change your mind. Like, it's okay for you to go back and try again. Like, this decision isn't just made and that's it forever. And I've supported people who've also relactated even further down, like weeks and weeks down the line, and referred to your work, because it helps to know that that exists, because then we can say, this is possible. If this is something that you want to try, this is possible. And sometimes for some people, all they need is to try it. It's not even that they end up then being an avid breastfeeder for the next 5 years, just that they tried it and then they left knowing, well, I did everything I could, and then I'm happy with how it turned out, because I wasn't forced down this path.
Yeah, I see that every week. If I see 3 relactation mums a week, at least one of them will have that experience where maybe we don't get a full milk supply back, or maybe nothing really happens, but she will generally speaking reflect that I've tried everything to make this work. I've really given this my all, that it's not meant to be. And along the way, I've learned about feeding my baby with a bottle close to my breast, and carrying my baby in a sling, and having a massage with my baby, or bathing with my baby. And I wasn't doing any of that stuff before. And often just the act of going through relactation, regardless of the results, will lead to a sense of healing, because it's not about the nutrition, it's about the closeness and the connection, which we can recreate in other ways when the time is right.
Absolutely. And we need that reassurance mentally, that we always had the power to do this. It wasn't our fault. In fact, we were not supported well enough, which is often the case, isn't it? And I mean, I don't say that lightly, because I know that that's difficult, and I'm not pointing fingers at any people in particular, but of course the system itself in the UK, and in lots of places, but we're in the UK, it doesn't support. It tells people to breastfeed because that's good, and then it doesn't support us to do that with the right education, with the right actual physical hands-on support, with the right information as we go through, with understanding how breastfeeding changes as well, because it's not the same in the beginning as it is after a couple of weeks, and then after a couple of months, and then after a couple of years. It's a change in relationship, and when we understand that, we can get our head round why it changes so regularly. But of course, we don't know that unless anyone tells us.
No, and there's still this first of all, I just want to say that actually you're right about the system, because I know so many midwives and health visitors who are doing their damnedest. They're really working hard, and yet they have 5 other people they have to get to that morning, or they're not allowed to give out NG tubes for SNS feeding, or they're not supposed to do X, Y, and Z, and their hands are really tied. And if we had a society that supported breastfeeding, they wouldn't have those issues. I mean, that's the first thing, right? And I forgot on my second thing, but that's the first thing I wanted to say. Can you tell it's 8:30 at night?
I know, it's getting on, isn't it? Right, okay, we will work our way to the final question. I think I've covered the rest of them. And that is, well then, if you could forge a master plan, Lucy, to heal the world, what would that be? What would that look like for you? How are we going to do it?
Well, first of all, everyone needs a hug, and if they don't like hugs, then chocolate or gin or whatever their thing is, right? Let's just get everybody in a room and just love on them. Do you know what I mean? Just listen and hold space. And if everybody just, I was in a conversation on a Facebook page the other day with somebody who I was agreeing with, but because I'd expressed the opinion that just because this was how he viewed the world didn't necessarily mean that everybody viewed the world that way. He thought I was a terrible person, and and it was just really odd. And I was I'm agreeing with you on this situation. I'm just saying that for some people this thing is difficult, and we need to acknowledge that. And I was like, no, there's no room for that. And if everybody could just view the world from everyone else's point of view, just for a moment, just take a step back and just think, what is this situation like for that person over there who's struggling with this? Why are they acting in that way? Even if it's just for 30 seconds, I think we'd all be a lot more understanding and a lot more patient. And that, if nothing else, just listening to people is going to make such a difference to healing the world. I really believe that.
Yeah.
As hippie as that sounds,
No, I think that's lovely. I mean, we can't have too much love, can we?
That's what people need. Just love and connection. That's what everyone's missing. I really believe that. Just more love and understanding,
I think
and
the
a lot
Beatles
of good
said
stuff.
something along those lines as well.
That's reassuring.
Maybe when this series is finished, I'll get everybody on Zoom together and we'll do a rendition of All You Need Is Love, and we'll heal the world
We will just do
from
that
that
one
point
song.
of view. That's it. We'll go viral and everything.
I have my Nobel Peace Prize, thanks.
Yeah, exactly. We have to start somewhere, don't we? And that sounds like a good place to start. I think when you're talking on online forums quite a lot, we lose the person behind there, don't we? Sometimes we even lose ourselves because we end up saying things that we wouldn't have ever said before.
Yeah, we've all
Oh,
been there,
Laura.
right?
Hi, Laura. Laura says, hug and hold space for people. Very wise words, Lucy.
I agree. Hug and hold space.
Yeah. So I can't remember what I was saying now.
Forums and losing ourselves.
Oh
And
yeah. We kind of
done it.
lose ourselves and say things that we wouldn't usually say to people, and then we let other people say things to us that we wouldn't normally let people say. And then we get all defensive about it. And I've had the same as you. Like I've been saying the same thing in different words to somebody, and they're like, I don't agree with you, I think this. And I'm like, no, but I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying the same thing as you, but I'm saying it in a different way to you. And sometimes you just have to go, okay, yeah, have a nice day, bye.
I mean, the sleep I've lost over the years around internet forums that I haven't lost in my day-to-day life. You know, if I'd have a conversation with somebody, we don't get that level of anger and rudeness that comes up, right? But I think, yeah, just letting it go would be it's probably the best way to maintain your sanity, isn't it? Just going, okay, you're being a bit of a whatever, I'm going to just walk away from you, because some people really can't be reached.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not always about the other person either, because sometimes we do project, don't we? So we think they're saying whatever it is that we're saying in our head, like, you think this thing about me, and they don't. But we hear
Yeah,
it like that because of our own insecurities. So I think
yeah,
there's work on both sides, isn't there? Definitely.
totally, yes.
Right. Okay. Well, I've just got one more question for you, and that's to ask you to tell us, those people watching, how they find you, how they work with you. If they are thinking, I didn't know you existed, and I wish I did. How do I find you and work with you? Where will they go to find you?
Okay, if you can hear any background noise, it's because the dog and the child have now ganged up on me and are both in here, so that's fun.
Nice.
Facebook is the best place to find me, though. Lucy Ruddle, IBCLC on Facebook. The page has messenger function is open on there, so you can message, you can see what I'm doing on there. I am on Instagram, but not quite as well as I am on Facebook. I find Instagram a bit tricky. And email Lucy Ruddle, IBCLC. No, I can't remember my email address. How bad is that? But it's on my Facebook page. So go to Facebook, find me there.
Facebook. Yeah. Awesome. We haven't had any questions come in and say, give us a question if you want. Is there anything else, Lucy, that has cropped up in your head that you would like to say in relation to anything?
Hello, Alfie.
Hello.
No questions. Just Alfie, let me just talk, okay, baby. All right. This is all very new to us. We've had this dog for approximately 12 hours. Just that. Thank you for having me here. I've really lost my train of thought now. You know what kids are like for distracting you. Thank you so much for letting me be involved in this. I think it's a really important conversation to be having, and I'm really honoured that I've been able to be involved in it.
Oh, thank you, Lucy. It's been really lovely to speak to you too, and something that's been on my list for a while. And I know, I have thanked you kind of privately anyway for the support that you've given me over the last couple of years. I suppose there have been occasions where I've been like, I don't know what the answer is. And I think I wouldn't still be breastfeeding a 4 and 5-year-old now if I hadn't have had the friendly ear of yourself to be able to just reflect back to me the things that I needed to hear, I think.
You're amazing. Yeah, you're amazing. You do the work yourself. All we do as lactation consultants is give you the space to have the thoughts.
And that's so funny because that's almost something that I've said recently as well about the work that I'm doing. I'm giving people the chance to do the work themselves by giving them what they need to do that. And you know, it makes me feel even more closely connected to you.
Good.
And you know, I'm so honoured to be able to spend time with people who are doing such important jobs. So
Me
thank
too.
you so much for being here, and you'll be able to
Oh,
catch all of the other Healing Within and Without interviews on the Simply Natal YouTube channel, as well as there's a backlog on Facebook if that's easy enough to find.
yeah.
A couple of them are on Instagram, but I'm also
I can
not.
watch them now as well. Now I've
Yeah,
got my
you
own
can go.
interview, I can watch them.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and I'll say goodbye so that we can let you go for your evening, the rest of your evening, and your dog. Take care.
Yes. Bye,
Bye
everybody.
bye.
Bye bye.